Listen here, lady. This ain't some house pet you can train with kibble and praise. The words dripped with barely concealed contempt, bouncing off the cinder block walls of the specialized canine training facility. Chief Warrant Officer Jackson, a man whose physique suggested he spent more time in the gym than with dogs, waved dismissively toward the imposing animal prowling behind reinforced chain-link fencing. The small assembly of trainee handlers and observing soldiers snickered, a hollow, obsequious sound that filled the clinical space. Their eyes darted from Jackson's sneering expression to the woman standing motionless at the perimeter of the observation area. She was the target of his mockery, a civilian contractor hired to evaluate the program, and in his assessment she represented nothing more than bureaucratic waste of his precious time. She wore faded denim jeans and a weathered olive green field jacket. Her dark hair was pulled into a functional, no-nonsense bun. She offered no visible reaction to the insult. Her posture remained steady. Her expression stayed neutral. Her gaze, an unsettling shade of steel blue, remained locked on the magnificent, troubled animal in the enclosure. The dog, a German shepherd named Reaper, was both a legend and a liability. He was a veteran of over 80 high-stakes operations, the loyal companion of an elite operator who had been killed in action 3 years prior. Since his handler's death, Reaper had become an enigma wrapped in controlled aggression. He obeyed no commands, accepted no handlers, a $700,000 military asset now confined to a kennel. Too valuable to put down, too volatile to field. But high above the training floor, behind the tinted glass of the command observation booth, the base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with interest. She ignored the mocking crowd and the preening warrant officer. She observed something different. She recognized the woman's bearing. It was a stillness she hadn't witnessed in years, a type of rooted composure that belonged to another world, another kind of pressure. It was the stance of someone who had spent a lifetime in calculated silence, listening to the space between gunshots in environments where a single mistake meant death. It was a stillness she last observed on a tarmac in Ramadi, in the moments before a classified operation from which not everyone came home. If you believe true respect is earned through action, not words, make sure you're subscribed to the Final Watch below, because the stories we share here reveal what real strength looks like. The woman, Dr. Elena Navarro, had arrived that morning with a minimal file and a sealed letter from Special Operations Command. Her credentials included a doctorate in behavioral neuroscience and an impressive collection of published research. But to Chief Warrant Officer Jackson, this was merely administrative theater. He saw soft civilian hands, an unmilitary haircut, and a complete absence of operational bearing. He saw an academic about to receive a brutal education in the difference between textbook theory and the harsh reality of an elite military working dog. He had made it his mission for the day to expose her inadequacy, to establish dominance, so he could return to what he considered real work. "You see, ma'am," Jackson continued, his voice booming with self-satisfaction, "Reaper here was bonded to a genuine warrior, a Tier 1 operator, not someone who studies dogs from an air-conditioned office. This animal has more combat deployments than most officers on this installation. He responds to highly specialized conditioning protocols you wouldn't begin to comprehend." He was addressing her, but his performance was for the audience of young handlers who absorbed his every word. Their expressions showed a blend of reverence for him and pity for her. He was reinforcing his dominance, cementing the rigid power structure of the kennel facility. Here, operational experience was the only credential that mattered, and in his judgment, she possessed none. Elena Navarro seemed oblivious to his monologue. Her focus was absolute, a concentrated beam of attention directed at the pacing animal. Reaper moved with fluid, predatory precision, a compressed spring of muscle and instinct. His triangular ears rotated independently, capturing every sound. His amber eyes missed nothing. The other handlers maintained a respectful distance, their wariness a tangible presence in the air. They had all attempted to work with him. They all carried the consequences of their failure, some visible scars, most psychological. The dog was more than merely aggressive. He was mourning, a soldier whose battle buddy had been violently removed, leaving him isolated in a world he no longer recognized. He was a reflection of his lost handler, silent, lethal, and utterly alone. Jackson, interpreting her silence as intimidation, intensified his attack. "We've had the finest dog handlers in the military attempt to rehabilitate him. Special forces, Delta operators, Marine raiders, you name them. They couldn't even get him to accept a high-value food reward. So, what precisely do you think you're going to achieve here today, Doctor? The title was weaponized, designed to frame her as an interloper, an academic tourist in his gritty, practical domain. The silence that followed was oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of Reaper's claws on the concrete floor. Elena Navarro finally shifted her weight, a subtle, almost undetectable movement. She turned her head slightly, her steel blue eyes meeting Jackson's for the first time. Her voice, when it emerged, was quiet, stripped of emotion. It was neither challenge nor defense. It was a simple technical inquiry. What's his current hydration protocol? The question was so unexpected, so clinically mundane, that it completely disrupted Jackson's performance. He blinked, momentarily thrown. What? Water access. Is it scheduled or continuous? What's the ambient temperature maintained? Have you analyzed the mineral composition? German shepherds bred for arid climate operations have distinct renal requirements. The quiet precision of her questions, the depth of her technical knowledge, hung in the air like a challenge no one had anticipated. The trainee handlers stopped smirking. They exchanged uncertain glances. Jackson scoffed, recovering his bluster. We're operating a military kennel, ma'am. Not a veterinary spa. It's a bowl. We fill it with water. Without another word, Elena Navarro returned her attention to the dog. The brief exchange concluded, but the first fracture had appeared in the warrant officer's armor of arrogance. He had anticipated fear or deference. He had received calm, surgical competence. And in that moment, the dynamic began to shift. A silent, tectonic movement that only the dog and the woman seemed to perceive, and perhaps the colonel, watching with increasing fascination from the booth high above. The demonstration was carefully orchestrated theater designed by Jackson to finalize Navarro's public embarrassment. He called it the hostile engagement response drill. The scenario was straightforward. A handler in a full-body bite suit acting as an aggressor would create a disturbance at the opposite end of the training yard. A dog would be released to neutralize the threat. It was standard procedure, but with Reaper, it was a virtually guaranteed failure. The perfect opportunity for Jackson to validate his assessment. All right, everyone, listen up, he barked at his team. We're going to demonstrate to the doctor here exactly what we're dealing with. Specialist Brooks, you're the decoy. A young, visibly nervous specialist nodded, his face pale behind the protective face guard of the bulky bite suit. Remember protocol, Jackson instructed loudly, his words clearly intended for Navarro's benefit. No sudden movements until the dog is released. We don't want to prematurely trigger his prey drive. Not that it matters. He won't comply anyway. He turned to Navarro with a condescending smile. You might want to step back, ma'am. This can get dangerous. Elena Navarro didn't move. She simply stood near the fence line, her arms loosely crossed, her posture relaxed yet alert. She was an island of calm in a manufactured storm. The gate to Reaper's enclosure was opened remotely. The dog didn't explode out as others typically did. He stalked forward, his movements deliberate, his head lowered. He surveyed the yard, his intelligence palpable. He was not a weapon. He was a warrior assessing a battle space. At the far end, Specialist Brooks began to shout, waving a padded training baton, playing his assigned role as aggressor. Release command, Jackson yelled into his radio. Engage, engage, engage. But Reaper didn't move. He stood in the center of the yard, completely ignoring the flailing specialist. His attention was elsewhere. He looked past the handlers, past the equipment, his gaze sweeping the perimeter until it settled on the silent woman by the fence. He froze completely, his body a statue of coiled tension, his eyes locked with hers. A low growl rumbled from his chest, a sound like approaching thunder. See? Jackson said with triumphant satisfaction. Complete non-compliance. The asset is compromised beyond recovery. He was about to terminate the drill to cement his victory when the situation took a sharp, uncontrolled turn. Specialist Brooks, perhaps frustrated or overeager, violated protocol. He took several aggressive steps forward, slapping the baton against his padded thigh to generate noise, attempting to provoke a reaction from the dog. It was a catastrophic error. In an instant, Reaper transformed. The low growl became a visceral, bone-chilling snarl. The fur along his spine stood erect. In an explosion of speed that defied comprehension, he closed the 50-yard distance in under 3 seconds. But he wasn't tracking toward the bite suit. He had identified Brooks's protocol breach not as part of the exercise, but as a genuine, unpredictable threat. He bypassed the padded limbs and launched himself with terrifying precision at the specialist's only vulnerable area, his exposed throat. The handler screamed. Jackson's face went white with horror. "No! Reaper! Out! Out!" Brooks stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet, falling to the ground as the 70-pound missile of muscle and teeth prepared to connect. It was a fatal attack in the making, a tragedy about to unfold in real time. The other handlers were paralyzed, their training rendered useless by the sheer velocity of the chaos. Jackson fumbled for the remote to the dog's electronic collar, but it was too late. The distance was too short, the dog's intent too absolute. In that split second of frozen panic, as a life hung in the balance, Elena Navarro moved. She didn't shout, she didn't run. She simply took 2 calm steps forward, placing her hands on the chain-link fence, her entire being focused on the unfolding violence. The air was thick with screams and the frantic, useless commands of the kennel master. But through the noise, a single sound cut through the chaos, clear and sharp as breaking glass. It wasn't a word, it was a whistle. A short 3-note sequence, impossibly soft, yet piercing the cacophony like a knife. It was a sound that didn't belong. A private signal in a public catastrophe. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. In midair, inches from Specialist Brooks's throat, Reaper's body contorted. He twisted, breaking his own momentum with a violent muscular spasm, and landed on the ground with a grunt, his paws skidding in the dirt. The killing lunge was aborted. The attack simply canceled. The dog, breathing heavily, did not look at the terrified specialist on the ground. He didn't look at the stunned handlers. He turned his head, his ears perked forward, and stared directly at Elena Navarro. The murderous rage in his eyes was gone, replaced by something else entirely. Confusion, recognition, and a flicker of profound, searching hope. The yard fell into deafening, ringing silence. The only sound was the ragged, panicked gasping of Specialist Brooks, who was scrambling backward on his hands and knees, his eyes wide with the terror of his near-death experience. Chief Warrant Officer Jackson stood with the remote in his hand, his mouth hanging open, his face a mask of utter stupefied disbelief. The world had stopped turning. Every certainty he held about this dog, every assumption about this woman, had just been shattered by a quiet professional and a simple, impossible whistle. The silence that blanketed the training yard was heavier than any sound. It was a vacuum filled with the unspoken shock of a dozen personnel who had just witnessed a miracle and a tragedy averted in the same breath. They stared, unblinking, at the scene before them. Specialist Brooks being helped to his feet by trembling comrades, his face ashen. The dog Reaper remained where he had landed, a perfect statue of obedience, his entire being focused on the woman at the fence. And Chief Warrant Officer Jackson, the loud, confident authority, was utterly speechless. His arrogance had been stripped away in a single moment, leaving behind raw, gaping awe. That's when the sound of a heavy door opening echoed from the main building. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez emerged, descending the concrete steps from the observation booth. She moved with calm, deliberate purpose that commanded attention. The handlers instinctively straightened, their shock momentarily replaced by ingrained discipline. The colonel didn't look at them. She didn't look at Jackson. Her eyes were fixed on Elena Navarro. She walked across the yard, dust puffing around her polished boots, and stopped not in front of Navarro, but beside her, her gaze following hers to the dog. Reaper, seeing the colonel, let out a low whine, a sound of deep, conflicting emotion. The colonel watched the dog for a long moment, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, before she finally turned to her aide, a young captain who had followed her out, tablet in hand. He remained seated, his posture a testament to the power of the whistle that still hung in the air. "Captain," the colonel said, her voice quiet but carrying unmistakable command, "pull up the file for Operation Shadowfall, access code Charlie 37, full clearance." The captain fumbled with the tablet, his fingers suddenly clumsy. "Ma'am, that operation it's sealed. Tier 1 classification. I don't have the authority." "You do now," the colonel stated flatly. She leaned in and whispered a passphrase into the captain's ear. The young officer's eyes widened in astonishment. He typed furiously, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. A moment later, a heavily redacted file appeared on the screen. "Ma'am, it's open," he whispered, his voice filled with reverence.
Lieutenant Colonel Martinez took the tablet and turned, angling the screen so that the now gathering crowd of handlers, and especially Chief Warrant Officer Jackson, could see it. She swiped past lines of blacked-out text until she reached the personnel section. A photograph appeared, grainy and taken under harsh field conditions. It showed a younger, uniformed version of the woman standing before them, her face streaked with camouflage paint. Beside her, alert and magnificent, was a younger version of the dog Reaper. The colonel's finger tapped on the text beside the photo. The words were stark, stripped of all but essential facts, and each one landed on Chief Warrant Officer Jackson like a physical blow.
Name Navarro, Elena. Rank at time of separation. Captain. Unit. Joint Special Operations Command. K-9. Special Operations Detachment. Classified. Title. Program Architect and Primary Handler, Operation Shadowfall. She swiped again, and a list of commendations filled the screen. A silver star, 3 bronze stars with Valor device, a purple heart. Mission logs from locations that didn't officially exist. Operations that had been buried in the deepest vaults of national security. The handlers gasped. They weren't looking at a civilian consultant. They were in the presence of a ghost, a decorated special operations officer, a warrior of the highest caliber. Chief Warrant Officer Jackson's face had gone from white to a mottled red of profound, soul-crushing shame. He finally understood. The dog wasn't broken. He was loyal. He had been waiting all this time for the only command he would ever truly recognize. The whistle hadn't been a trick. It was a key, one that unlocked a bond forged in the crucible of combat, a connection that Jackson, with all his bluster and protocols, could never have comprehended. He had been trying to hotwire a vehicle while the master locksmith stood silently beside him, holding the only key in existence. The quiet competence he had mistaken for weakness was, in fact, the profound, unshakable confidence of a master who had no need to announce her presence. She didn't need to prove her worth with words because her entire being was a testament to it. And in the crushing silence of that revelation, Chief Warrant Officer Jackson finally understood the chasm that separated noise from authority and arrogance from true respect. The full weight of the revelation settled upon the assembled personnel, and the atmosphere in the training yard shifted from shock to something approaching sacred reverence. They were standing on hallowed ground, in the presence of a figure whose legend they had only heard in whispered rumors around late-night conversations in distant war zones. The story of Shadowfall and its handler was a myth, a campfire tale told to inspire new recruits. A handler and dog so perfectly synchronized they moved as one entity, a phantom pair that could infiltrate any target unseen and unheard. And the ghost was standing right in front of them, in blue jeans and a simple jacket. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez let the moment settle in the air, allowing the full impact of the truth to dismantle every assumption Jackson and his team had ever made. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she turned to face the woman who was still focused entirely on her dog. She drew herself to her full height, her back ramrod straight. In a motion as crisp and sharp as a rifle shot, she brought her hand up in a formal, perfect salute. It was not the casual salute one gives a fellow officer in passing. It was a gesture of profound, unambiguous respect. A public acknowledgement from a base commander to a warrior of equal if not greater stature. "Captain Navarro," she said, her voice resonating with authority that silenced every sound in the vicinity. "Welcome back. It is an honor to have you on my installation. We all thought you were lost after the host incident." Her words filled in the final tragic piece of the puzzle. She hadn't just left the service. She had been presumed killed in action, another name to be whispered with respect and sorrow. Elena Navarro finally broke her gaze with the dog and looked at the colonel. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging the salute. "It was a long journey home, Colonel," she said, her voice still quiet, but now it held the weight of mountains, the memory of deserts, the echo of loss. It was the voice of a survivor. She then turned her head and looked at Reaper. She gave another command, this one verbal, but just as quiet as the whistle. It was a single word, spoken in Pashto. "Rara." Comb. Instantly, Reaper broke his tense posture. He rose and trotted forward, sitting directly at her feet. He gave a small, eager whine, his tail sweeping a soft, hopeful rhythm against the hard-packed earth. He was home. His world, which had been gray and silent for years, was suddenly filled with color and meaning. His commander was here, his partner had returned. Then Lieutenant Colonel Martinez turned her gaze upon Chief Warrant Officer Jackson. The colonel's eyes were like chips of obsidian. The warmth and respect she had shown the captain vanished, replaced by cold, controlled fury that was far more terrifying than any shouting. "Chief," she began, her voice dangerously low, "you stand in a long and honorable tradition of military working dog handlers. It is a legacy of trust, of partnership, of a sacred bond between soldier and canine. Today, you chose to represent that legacy with cheap insults and arrogant posturing." Jackson flinched as if struck. He stood rigidly at attention, his eyes locked forward, his face burning with shame so intense it was painful to witness. "You had a living legend walk onto your training grounds," the colonel continued, her voice rising just enough to cut through the stillness. "The woman who wrote the doctrine. No, the woman who created the very foundation of the protocols you so arrogantly claimed she wouldn't understand. She personally developed the conditioning methodology you've been poorly attempting to replicate. She didn't just train this dog, Chief. She built him. That whistle wasn't a party trick. It was a neural imprint command she embedded when he was a 12-week-old puppy. A sound layered with security, comfort, and absolute authority. A failsafe that just saved the life of one of your soldiers." The colonel took a step closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper, making it all the more menacing. "You assumed you were dealing with an outsider, a civilian, a woman you could intimidate. You were wrong. You were standing in the shadow of the very person who created the elite standards of your profession. And you were too blind, too ignorant, and too full of your own noise to see it. You have not just failed this command. You have failed the legacy of every handler who ever bled beside their partner. Is that understood, Chief?" Chief Warrant Officer Jackson's throat worked, but no sound emerged. He could only manage a choked, strangled nod. The public correction was absolute, a verbal dissection performed with surgical precision. The lesson was clear, not just for Jackson, but for every single person present. True authority doesn't need to announce itself. True competence is quiet, and respect is a debt you pay to greatness, whether it arrives in a uniform or in a pair of blue jeans. The story of what happened in the training yard didn't just spread. It detonated. It moved through the base's ecosystem like a shockwave, traveling from the K-9 unit to the motor pool, from the flight line to the dining facility, from the barracks to the command building. It was whispered over radio headsets, typed in urgent text messages, and recounted in hushed, awed tones over evening meals at the enlisted club. Within hours, everyone knew. They knew about the arrogant warrant officer and the quiet woman. They knew about the dog that couldn't be controlled and the impossible whistle that had stopped him instantly. The legend of the ghost of Shadowfall was reborn. Captain Elena Navarro, the woman presumed dead for years, had returned. Not with fanfare or press conference, but with a quiet, devastating demonstration of pure competence. The narrative became a modern military fable, a cautionary tale about the mortal sin of assumption. Pilots told it to their cocky new aviators. Senior NCOs told it to their raw recruits. It became a teaching tool, a cultural touchstone on the installation. The phrase, "don't pull a Jackson," entered the local lexicon, shorthand warning against judging anyone by their appearance. For Chief Warrant Officer Jackson, the experience was not just humbling, it was transformative. The foundation of his professional identity had been shattered. His entire worldview, built on a rigid hierarchy of visible strength and loud authority, had been proven false. For 2 days, he was a ghost himself, avoiding eye contact, performing his duties with mechanical, joyless efficiency. The swagger was gone, replaced by heavy, thoughtful silence. On the 3rd day, he sought out Captain Navarro. He found her not in an office or briefing room, but where she always was, with Reaper. She was sitting on the floor of a sanitized kennel, the dog's massive head resting peacefully in her lap as she methodically checked his ears for signs of infection. Jackson stopped at the open gate, his cover in his hands. He stood there for a full minute, silent, before she finally looked up, her steel blue eyes calm and questioning. "Ma'am," he began, his voice rough with emotion, stripped of all former bravado. "Captain Navarro, I came to apologize. What I did was inexcusable. My behavior was unprofessional, and my assumptions were ignorant. There's no excuse for it, ma'am. I was wrong. Elena Navarro simply nodded, continuing her examination of the dog's ear. We all make assumptions, Chief. The important thing is what we do after we learn they're wrong. Her lack of condemnation was, in its own way, more impactful than any lingering anger would have been. She wasn't interested in shame. She was interested in the mission. The mission was the dog. Jackson took a hesitant step forward. I've spent my entire career thinking I knew these animals, thinking I knew what it took. But watching the bond you have with him, I realize I don't know anything at all. Not really. He looked at her, his request laid bare in his eyes. If you be willing, ma'am, I'd like to learn. I want to understand what I saw. I want to be better. Elena looked from the chief's earnest, humbled face to the trusting animal in her lap. She saw a bridge, an opportunity not for retribution, but for growth. Her philosophy had never been about personal glory. It was about the welfare of the animals and the effectiveness of the mission. She gave another small nod. The dog comes first, Chief. Always, she said, her words echoing the core of her entire existence. The bond isn't about dominance. It's about trust. It's a silent conversation. You have to learn to listen. And so began the re-education of Chief Warrant Officer Jackson and his entire unit. Captain Navarro didn't hold lectures or use PowerPoint presentations. She taught through demonstration. She showed them how to read the subtle language of the dogs, the twitch of an ear, the shift in weight, the dilation of pupils. She taught them that respect was the foundation of obedience, and that trust, once earned, was a more reliable tool than any electronic collar or corrective chain. In the center of the K-9 unit's main office, a bulletin board was covered with commendations, schedules, and official notices. A few days after the incident, a new item appeared. No one ever admitted who had pinned up a single candid photograph. It wasn't a pose shot. It was taken on a cell phone in the moments after the training yard had cleared. It showed Captain Navarro kneeling in the dirt, her hand resting gently on Reaper's head. The powerful dog, the untamable beast, was looking up at her with an expression of such absolute devotion that it took one's breath away. Beneath the photo, someone had typed a small label and tacked it to the board. It wasn't an official plaque, but it was more powerful than any engraved brass. It read simply, "Respect the bond." It became the unit's unofficial motto, a constant, silent reminder of a lesson they had learned in the most dramatic way imaginable. A year passed. The transformation of the base's K-9 program was nothing short of remarkable. Under the quiet, steady guidance of Captain Elena Navarro, who had agreed to stay on as a permanent civilian advisor, the program became the new standard of excellence for the entire armed forces. Their success rates in training, deployment, and mission effectiveness skyrocketed. Dogs that had been written off as problem cases flourished under a new philosophy rooted in mutual respect and deep psychological understanding. The Navarro method, as it came to be known, was being incorporated into official military doctrine, set to revolutionize K-9 programs across all branches of service. Chief Warrant Officer Jackson, once a monument to arrogant ignorance, was now its most fervent and humble advocate. He was a changed man. The bluster was gone, replaced by quiet, watchful confidence. He spoke less and listened more. He treated every dog and every handler, regardless of rank or experience, with newfound respect. He began every new training class for incoming handlers, not with a demonstration of force, but with a story. He would stand before the fresh-faced recruits and tell them in raw, honest detail about the day he made the biggest mistake of his career. He told them about the quiet civilian woman he had belittled and the living legend he had been too blind to see. He told them about Reaper, the broken dog who was simply waiting for his hero to come home. He would point to the framed photo on the office wall now given a place of honor and say, "Your job is not to command an animal. Your job is to earn the trust of a partner. Forget everything you think you know about dominance. Your goal is to build a bond so strong that a single quiet whistle is more powerful than a leash, a fence, or a shouted order. Your goal is to learn to listen." The story became a foundational piece of institutional folklore. Newcomers to the base were told the tale of the ghost and the warrant officer almost as soon as they arrived. It served as a powerful parable,
a lesson that transcended the K-9 unit. It was a story about the danger of assumptions, about the quiet nature of true competence, and about the profound strength found in humility.
The training yard where the incident had occurred was unofficially renamed by the handlers. They called it Navarro's Corner. It was a place where miracles were possible, where the impossible had been made real. It was a constant physical reminder that the most formidable warriors are often the ones who don't feel the need to advertise their strength. They don't require the validation of others, because their confidence is internal, forged in crucibles that lesser individuals cannot even imagine. They prove their worth not with loud words, but with quiet, decisive, and undeniable action. Captain Navarro herself remained as unassuming as the day she arrived. She deflected all praise, redirecting any accolades to the dogs and the handlers themselves. She found her reward not in recognition, but in the sight of a once troubled dog working in joyful, perfect synchronization with a handler who understood the sanctity of their partnership. Her presence on the base was a constant grounding force. She was a living embodiment of the principle that true legacy isn't measured by the number of medals on a uniform or the rank on a collar. It is measured in the standards you set, the knowledge you pass on, and the positive change you inspire in others. Her victory was not over Chief Warrant Officer Jackson. It was over the ignorance he represented. It was a quiet revolution of competence over ego, of wisdom over prejudice, and it was a revolution that was just beginning. The ripple effects of that single afternoon were spreading, carrying a simple but powerful message to every corner of the military world. Look deeper, listen closer, and never, ever underestimate the quiet professional. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where silent bonds define true strength, subscribe to The Final Watch.